What are
Because
those
you're always
quotes?
asking for quotes. So I prepared this time.
I love it.
Oh, so they go together, but the first one is all truly great thoughts are conceived by walking, which is by Friedrich
So,
Nietzsche. And the second one is if one just keeps on walking, everything will be all right. And that's by Soren Kierkegaard. John is very much into the dead philosophers, so I thought we would honor him here.
the last dead philosopher that I can think of is Mitch Hedberg. And he said, anywhere is walking distance if you have the time. Welcome to the Anatomy of Therapy. I'm Dr. John Cybulski. And today we are talking about walking. That's not true. We are talking about if you don't use it, you lose it. It's a pretty common saying, but there's actually a lot of meat on them bones. We're going to try to pick off today. Bobby saw that there was a lot of meat on them bones. What meat attracted you, Bobby?
I think my this existential doom that I feel every day, not from pandemic or our political environment, although those contribute to it.
Okay.
But more so my recognizing of my own mortality.
Sure.
As every year passes, I lose power and flexibility and strength, or some of the endless energy that you once had, and come home at 3 a.m. and then go play basketball at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
And so this idea has been just rolling through my head a lot lately. And just to preface, I mean, I reread the book for the second time, Story of the Human Body by Daniel Lieberman, who's a great, basically, I think he's from Harvard, but he's he kind of discusses the human body from the evolutionary perspective. And in that book, he's constantly talking about evolutionary mismatches. And that mismatch, what that means is that we are not acting in accordance of how we used to act for most of our existence, as Homo sapiens, or even before Homo sapiens. So anywhere from the last 150,000 years to millions of years, where we did certain things and then very suddenly we have taken right turns and abandoned some of the movements and lifestyles and that we used to do. So I gave those two walking quotes because I was reading, and it said something like, the hunter and gatherer societies used to walk over 7 miles a day.
Yeah.
And now the modern American walks a third of a mile a day.
Right.
So these evolutionary mismatches don't necessarily equate to the term if you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. But that simple phrase, which I think was, I remember from the 40-Year-Old Virgin, and that meant something different. But what I think about it is almost everything that comes into my office every day is connected to that phrase. And a lot of times we want to complicate things, and I've met chiropractors and clinicians that want to be like the world's greatest diagnostician, and they want to say that you have a posterior lateral corner knee injury and it's this, and here's the exact sets and reps, and then once that pain's gone, we let you go. But in reality, there's so many times there's just problem A, B, C, D, E, and F, and they can often be linked together, and not necessarily in that pompous way that clinicians do, where they connect your big toe to your right shoulder to your trigger finger, and like we can all do that if we want to show
watching
off.
me practice the other day, dude. Are you spying on me, man? Sorry.
That's all you do.
It is.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Not in that way, but more of the fact that, if you can't squat, for example, that has ramifications all over the place. Maybe you have bowel disruption, maybe you have hemorrhoids, maybe you have knee pain, maybe you have ankle pain, maybe you have headaches, maybe you don't breathe well, maybe you don't rest well. I mean, all these things can be connected to the fact that you can't squat. So, if you don't squat, you lose the squat. Now, I don't care necessarily about how much you can squat in CrossFit or powerlifting, but just the functional ability to squat. And some people will say, well, squat is an invented movement, but I'm not talking about the sport of squatting. I just mean folding yourself up so you can sit down and you can rest, like we've done in history.
Okay, this is the first disagreement I have with you, and it's not exactly a disagreement, but I'll try to. If you don't use it, you lose it. And then we have people who talk about how functional exercises are, right? And I would like one day, I'm just going to write a book on how to save the word functional, because it's a fine word in relation to dysfunction. But when you just say functional and it means just twisty stuff, or like we were talking about with CrossFit, if you don't use it, you lose it. Our workouts are functional. In other words, when you come to the box, you do some muscle ups, and then when you help your friend move, you'll be able to lift up the couch and you won't be able to hurt yourself. And I agree that in general, CrossFit can increase your VO2 max and your ability to take load on a day-to-day basis. Absolutely. But I think it also gets kind of dumped on inappropriately. So because they're like, well, I have back pain and I do CrossFit. CrossFit gave me back pain. So I'm using stuff too much, but it's hurting me. So now we're just then again confusing the function of things, right? How much of your working out is going to help you use and not lose your daily standard of living? Like from a doctor's perspective, I want to know what it is you think you're losing, right? What is the it we're using? What is the it we're losing? Does that make sense? What is it people think that they're losing oftentimes? Do you know what I mean? Like there is this statement implies some sort of loss. And if there's something that you're hinting at here to start us off, there's a loss.
I would actually think or say that it's typically the opposite, is that they're slightly oblivious to their loss. That's more of the issue, and they've already lost it when they go to CrossFit and they hurt their back, but they say, but I've been CrossFitting. I mean, they've already lost the problem, unless it's horrible coaching and programming. That's still possible. You can have perfect movement, but just overload or bad coaching. But let's just assume most cases, if we have good coaching and everything, they've already lost the functional thing. So the functional exercise now is not functional at all, because you don't have that ability. So it doesn't matter if you're single leg hopping onto a Bosu ball in juggling, but if you don't have the ankle or the hip, it's no longer a functional exercise. Functional exercise is just really a throwaway term to say that, not a throwaway term, it can be functional, but it's a term that says, hey, this should, if it is functional, is something that's going to help improve you to get better at the thing that you need to do on a daily basis, whether you're a golfer or work at the desk or a parent or whatever it is. That would be a functional exercise if it does improve your quality of life towards the things that you do to perform.
For sure.
But it's really that patients, I think, come in with this idea that they have hurt something and that thing needs to recover, and that recovers at a certain rate. According to Google, this should be over in 3 to 6 weeks, right? Because I have inflammation. So why is this not getting better? I think that's how a lot of people think.
Yeah.
But there's so many factors that go into why your shoulder hurts. It could be 3 months. It could be 13 years. So the fact that they are kind of oblivious to the loss is the problem, I would say. Therefore, they ascribe maybe the injury to the wrong thing.
Completely. And like that's what I think an appointment is with a patient. As a doctor and a patient comes in, they have a loss. A loss by its virtue is something probably a little bit indescribable to the person. You know, they may be able to describe it as, you know, they can't bend over as far, or they can't lift as many bricks during the day. But that doesn't really get to like the heart of the loss, right? And so that's what a good history starts to do. That's what the rehab starts to do. That's what testing starts to do. That's what asking questions on top of questions start to do. I think there is, though, what you were talking about with the workout being functional, the kind of connection between if you're at a loss, is it like you are, and going, if you're at a loss and you're go join a CrossFit gym, is it like getting a bunch of student debt and then opening up a chiropractic clinic? Like you're already at a loss and you're jumping in on making another investment that is in the same avenue of that loss, right? So if you are going to make that investment in CrossFit, in an exercise, and you're already in a position of a loss, you better protect that investment. You better make sure that investment is clean and you know what you're investing in and you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. You know what I mean? Some people just go work out. They're like, if I just start working out, I will make my body that has experienced some sort of loss stronger. And it, to the degree to which they're, and that's true, it's a very vague thing. If I just go work out my body, well, I don't know how to work out my body. Those CrossFit people definitely do some weird stuff. They definitely look like they know what they're doing. I'll go to them. You are at a loss already. You've got some debt to pay in your body somewhere. You better make sure that that investment is locked up when you kind of take that next step.
Yeah, and I think it's understandable for the athlete or the individual or the patient to go towards what's entertaining or exciting for them, right? They want to start CrossFit. They want to do a triathlon. They don't necessarily want to spend 45 minutes a day working on their ankle dorsiflexion because
Right.
you told them their ankle is the issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as a clinician, as the person that is treating the patient in front of you, sometimes what your job really can be sometimes is to provide reasons.
Mm.
You know, I was listening to Ed Milet talk about how he had a heart attack, and he said most people would say, most doctors would come and say, hey, you had a heart attack, we got to put this stent in or whatever because of this coronary blockage, and then, you know, a little bit of rehab and you'll be good as new. And he said, but my doctor said, do you have kids? And yeah, I have a girl. He said, do you want to walk her down the aisle or do you want some other man to walk her down the aisle? And he's like, that guy in that moment gave me a reason. And he's like, and then you better believe, like the next day I was, you know, shortly after, he was training, losing weight, getting healthy, doing everything he could because that guy gave him a reason. And that's sometimes what you need to do as a clinician, because we can't say, hey, don't do CrossFit because you have bad shoulders. You know, this is sometimes Spina's approach is pretty harsh, even though I agree with it. Dr. Andreo Spina will be like, hey, you have no business doing CrossFit. Your shoulder can't go overhead. You shouldn't be snatching. I think that patients or people want to do what's interesting and fun. They want to go do CrossFit. Absolutely. And if you don't give them any reasons, you just say, hey, your shoulder sucks. You shouldn't be doing CrossFit. They'll just go find another clinician that doesn't tell them to stop doing CrossFit.
Of course.
But if you tell them, hey, you know, you're only going to be able to do CrossFit for like a year and a half and you're going to blow this thing out and you're never going to be able to CrossFit again. I mean, do you want to be like Rich Froning, who's still competing at a high level and seems not to get injured? Or do you want to be those people that work their way onto the open leaderboard for 1 year and then you never heard from them again?
Right.
And most likely because they didn't, you know. So my point is, as a clinician, your job is sometimes to provide reasons for why they need to make a change, right?
100%. 100%. I just looked over my notes and it was like, goes right along exactly with what you're saying. In that the statement, if you don't use it, you lose it. The subject of that sentence is still you, right? There isn't this magical impartation of divine manual therapy that you are giving to the person. If you really want to say your manual,
into the matrix,
right. The cervical adjustment heard around YouTube, whatever. You've got a good microphone too. Congratulations. Pay me. But what I'm saying is that there is just a different. We were talking some nerdy philosophy, so just ignore this for a second. But scientists talk about a biological impulse and its symbolic fulfillment. So like you have a feeling inside your body, like you're thirsty. And then you're like, I grab a cup of water and I drink it and I go, okay, now I'm not thirsty. Drinking it was the fulfillment of that, the symbolic fulfillment of that impulse. So sometimes when people want to go do CrossFit and they're hurting their shoulder and things hurt for a while before they even start to address it, doing CrossFit is fulfilling a different like symbolic thing for them. Then it's more important that they feel part of this CrossFit tribe, that they do workouts with guys and girls with tattoos. Like it's important that the gym doesn't look like the Globo gym. Like these are important things to these people, whether they know it or not. right? And so if they start to lose, really what people lose when they go to CrossFit, if you also want to think about it, they're losing going to their 7 a.m. class and the camaraderie of hanging out with Bobby and Jeannie and Jessica. You know what I mean? They're missing, you know, clapping the last 30 seconds. Come on, you can do it, push through. Like they're missing those things as well. Not necessarily just like lumbar extension because of impingement on the right SI. Like there are doctors that understand impingement. There are doctors that understand nerve entrapment of the iliac, what femoral, doesn't matter. And there are doctors who understand that people like to work out, you know, and the various levels. And so like, that's exactly what I think your story is. Like this doctor realized, like, if you can catch that higher reason, giving them that, everything below just starts to like fill in easily.
Yeah, I think,
I think.
you know, I think I've made similar mistakes just on this point. I think I've made
Yeah.
these mistakes in my past, being too clinical with people, not really giving them reasons to do the thing, saying, hey, here's 4 exercises I need you to do.
Mm.
I don't discuss what, you know, we've talked about this before, but, you know, what is this preventing you from doing? What is your goals? What do you want to get back to? What makes you tick? You know, all these other questions, this motivational interviewing concept. If you just, you know, try to solve their clinical issue, sometimes, you know, well, you shouldn't be, but you're surprised that every time they come in, they tell you they didn't have time to do their exercises, you know,
Right.
and and a lot of people curate their business to make it that the patient is dependent upon them to recover.
Sure.
And we have talked about this before, and this is something that I'm not a fan of, where, you know, you scare the patient with their images, or you scare them with some esoteric diagnosis that you can't back up at all in any way, shape, or
Right.
form.
Sure.
And then you create a dependence model on you. And that can sometimes be monetarily effective. But it's never been in my, it's never been in
Well
my,
said. Well
I don't
said.
know. Yeah.
Monetarily effective. Sorry, go on, go on.
Monetarily effective.
But it's
Yeah.
not been in
Yeah.
your personal, like your authentic experience of how you would like to, you know, practice being a doctor.
Yeah. It's never seemed that rewarding for me, you know,
Right.
and if there was a case like that, I got more reward from getting them to realize that they do have some control over this.
Right.
You know, if they did understand that. There's some that just don't have any interest in that, and they just want me to do something,
Right.
and that's fine. We have an agreement. Okay, you don't want to do anything. You just want me to come to me.
Uh-huh.
That's actually okay. Those are the cases where I can kind of turn my brain off and just
Right.
do what the patient's asking for. That's what they're paying for it. Okay, do whatever. You know, that's what I say about CrossFit coaches. Sometimes it's not just CrossFit coaches' fault. You tell the person, don't do this. Don't do this. You know, don't touch the stove.
Right.
Don't touch the stove.
Yep.
And then eventually you're like, just lick it. You know, do whatever you want,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
because the clients don't always listen. So
Right.
eventually they're paying $200 a month. You can do whatever you want. At some point, if I'm the
Yeah.
coach, and I've been a CrossFit coach for a few boxes,
Mm-hmm.
I just give up. It's their problem. They want to pay for that. That's fine. You know what I
Right.
mean? But that's not the person that we're trying to talk about right now. That's not the
Yeah.
effect that we're trying to go for.
Well, I think, yeah. And if you don't use it, you lose it scenario as a doctor patient. Like you want to give the patient as much control as possible. Like there's a point, like in terms of medical interventions, like on, let's say, the spectrum of medical interventions, in terms of an open heart surgery, you want the patient to do as little as possible. In fact, we make them unconscious so they'll do as little as possible, right? That's on one end of the spectrum. That's obvious. That is the doctor and the doctor's team. That's their responsibility. On the other end of the spectrum is closer to that CrossFit coach, right? Who you're just going to tell them, you're going to hold the bar here, you're going to bend your knees slightly, you're going to lift up, and that's a deadlift. You know, you give them the minimal amount of guidance until you see, hey, keep your back straight, tuck your chin, whatever it is, keep your shoulders down. And then they are going to make the intervention themselves. They're going to do the WOD, they're going to lift the weight and burn the muscles, right? And then there's like closer towards personal training where there's like a guy watching your elbow and your shoulder and your chest and kind of poking at you and giving you more stuff versus the class. And then it kind of gets closer to the chiro. Like there are patients that do, whether they tell you or not, whether it's been relayed or not, They may think they want to do it themselves, but they're not capable enough. And you're like, look, I've got to manipulate this shoulder 70 times this visit. Like, it's just not something you can do. And if I can do it, I can expedite the process. Like, the intervention is most expeditious if I do the majority of the work here. But then there gets a point where the patient's health kind of crosses a border where you can put the impetus on them, kind of like in the CrossFit gym. And if you can give them a precise enough intervention, you can make the precise change that they feel they lost, right? And so there is that spectrum of things. But I'll just say, like, if you are a doctor and you're doing the same 7 things every day, or even if you're working on an algorithm basis, like there are these other manual therapists and rehab people who work on this massive algorithm of tests and interventions for each test and groups of tests and the interventions for those groups of tests, that can also get mechanical. If you can start to add in this thing that Bobby's talking about of giving a person a reason, you should have, by the way, algorithms going in your head. You should have kind of those advanced things happening in the background. You don't necessarily have to walk the patient through this algorithm. If in the back of your head, you can start to fill in those pieces and you can drop in the patient's why or reason on top, they can start to run that program themselves. I think it's mixing in that individual personal aspect with your clinical expertise that makes every patient different and fun and exciting. And you will find people who don't use it and have lost it, but you will give them something back and they'll find it and they'll gain it. Is that the opposite of it? I think so.
It's good. It's gold star. I like that.
That was a good rant. That was a good rant.
It's really good, man. That's why it's like end point.
George Costanza, walk out. Oh, yeah.
Full stop.
Full stop. Yeah.
But like, to close this down, I wanted to kind of slightly pivot towards the other phrasing of, if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
Which is more of the literal or actual interpretation of what when I was reading Daniel Lieberman's book. It's really this idea of the functional things, the things that we lose are, some of this because of these evolutionary mismatches. And I don't know if you have thought about this. It's a very simple concept, but I used to wonder, like, why are we the only ones that have to go, billions and billions of dollars to do musculoskeletal injuries and all these, non-traumatic pain, musculoskeletal pain, and the rest of the animal kingdom, they break things. They might break something and die. That does happen, right? They bleed out or something. But otherwise, they don't get like Achilles tendonitis, at least not in any aspect. I don't see a lot of cheetahs just limping because they have like inflammation of their Achilles, And the reason I'm talking about this is that's because we are the farthest removed from what we typically have been doing most of history. Right. And so I'm coming back to this evolutionary biology point to say, I wrote down notes from shoes, teeth, bone density, immune system, cardiovascular system, movement and exercise, myopia, nutrition, all these different topics that had something to do with how we don't behave how we used to do anymore. Myopia, this look how we're getting nearsighted and we lose farsightedness because we just hold phones in front of our faces. Actually, it's only been a couple thousand years where we read books even. And before that, everything was, walking, your vision passed beside you. You were constantly scanning for things and in the distance and you had to, focus on something near and then far and then semi far and semi near. Right. And the point is when you look at some of these when you look at these fossils, when you look at remains that we find, they have perfect teeth, they have perfect jaws. They don't have a history of, they have mild amounts of atherosclerosis in whatever remains that have been preserved. There's just so many different things that you don't see when you look in the past. So, for example, we don't chew that much anymore. we have blenders and Vitamixes and baby food, and we don't breastfeed as long. And and then what happens is you get protruded mandibles, protruded maxillas, we get narrow palates, and we get sleep apnea, and we have crooked teeth, and it goes on and on and on and on and on, right? Because we don't chew anymore. We don't chew hard things. We have flat feet because we have these hokas that we walk around in, and I'm not nothing against hoka. I mean, some people need a hoka, but my point is you wouldn't need a hoka if you had always been barefoot your whole life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Now, this is a long rant. I could go into each one of these points. The immune system. If you're in a wealthy family and you're kept in a bubble in your mansion and everything's wiped down by hand sanitizer by all the maids all day long, you're probably going to have allergies and autoimmune conditions later in life because you've built no resistance to anything. So
True.
if you can't, in our line of work, it's the squat, it's overhead movement with your arms, it's posture that goes down. You can't rotate. And I wrote something down and circled it like 3 times. So I think I thought it was important, but I wrote I wrote patterns take over because there's no constant variability. And patterns being the thing that's destructive. It's okay if you have, me and you have talked about patterns, and DNS talks about patterns, and PRI talks about patterns, and those natural, and I think it's called Yaclovian torque, which your brain is slightly torqued further forward on the right hemisphere. Right. That is a natural thing that exists. Okay, that might give us a pattern in our body. That's all right, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about patterns of forward head carriage, or patterns of sleep apnea, or patterns of hip impingement. These things come because there's no constant variability, and that is the thing I see the most that leads to why is there something coined lower cross syndrome? Like, why would we have that syndrome? It becomes because now we sit in chairs that are elevated way off the ground, and therefore we sit all the time, and that is not really normal. So we get things like lower cross syndrome, and it's not that simple. And the troubling thing is nobody wants to go back in time to a period where we slept on the floor and we sat Indian style and built a fire, and then we chewed hard, sinewy meat for 45 minutes per bite. Nobody wants to do that.
That's inefficient use of our meat chewing time, obviously.
Yeah, except for a few wild naturalists on Instagram.
For sure.
Those guys are just eating berries barefoot right now in the woods. So, but that's the troubling thing. That is the answer. That is the answer to so many of these problems. But we don't have that. So what do we do? Right?
No.
And I think one of the answers comes in preventative measures, but there's no money in preventative measures. Nobody wants to pay for an ACL program before they tear their ACL.
Of course.
But they'll pay everything they can to have the best surgeon in recovery after they tear their ACL, or after you're diagnosed with diabetes, or after your first MI. Then you're serious about it. And this is just a concept. This is now will just change completely to a psychological conversation, because this is just human psyche. And I don't really know what the answer is. But going full circle now, I think without reasons, there's no way you're going to convince anybody to care about any of this stuff, because they don't understand the loss. They don't understand what they've lost and what they will be losing in the future, right? Until it smacks them in the face.
And that's your job as a doctor, to use your crystal ball of experience to tell them what their kind of future looks like, depending on what it is you've tested and seen and you heard about them before. That's a big part of what a doctor is. You look into this crystal ball, the patient sees kind of muddled, opaque, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And you go, hey, I've been a doctor for 10 years. I see these tests. You're going to need to work on this. You're going to need to work on this. And if you can hit these marks at this point, then generally your shoulders should be better. If not, we're going to get you a steroid shot. If not, you need to start doing this or that. To clarify and give those people some real reasons. That is kind of the simple key to being a doctor. I have another take on the evolutionary thing, but it's going to lead down a whole path, and I'm going to do it anyway. So you'll have to tune in next time. I think the distinction in consciousness between these old people and us is that, and it still works with nature and animals. Animals know that they are different from other things. My cat knows he's not me because he can tell that my nature is different from his nature. The cat and I are not one. The cat has different needs. The cat has a different nature. So I know that they are separate. The idea with human consciousness, from Hegel to Kant and Damasio and Dennett, I think also kind of affirm it. The most recent AI stuff is a lot of German idealism that's happening, is that instead of differentiating between something outside of us that makes us unique, we can differentiate things within us that makes us unique. So like, I have a back pain. I go, oh, what is that in my back? There is something within me that is distinct from me. And then the human nature is I give that some sort of meaning, some sort of symbolic registration, like the cup thing earlier, right? And so we have these distinctions internally that we start to make assumptions about. And we start to create chairs. We start to not sit on floors. We start to process our meat differently. That would be my take on it. This one can go a long way, and that's a whole nother discussion, I think, actually. But also clarify things for your patients. If you don't use it, you lose it. Figure out what the it is, clarify that for your patients, and I think you'll have a much happier relationship. Anything left, Bobby?
No, not without going for another half hour.
I know, man. I know, dude. We gotta go. It's pitch black in Iceland. We'll continue this one. This is a good one. We'll continue this one. I have some thoughts I think I want to clarify from earlier too. If you don't use it, you lose it, is a useful saying in a lot of ways. And we'll probably have to go over this again because I can see Bobby chomping at the bit, but it's like midnight in Iceland. It's like 3 p.m. here. I don't even know. But thank y'all for listening so much. Have a wonderful week. Subscribe, rate us on iTunes, tell your friends, share this with everybody, and go vote or don't. You're an adult. Do whatever you want. Thank you for listening.
Go vote.